Welcome to Brave the New World. This is Matt Carano. CJ can't be with me today. He's off dealing with some family stuff and has been for the last week or so, 2 weeks almost. I actually do have another episode that I've already recorded with my buddy Sterling that was going to come out this morning. But then as I'm recording this, the United States and Israel are bombing Iran. That started happening this morning, February 28th, 2026. American and Israeli forces launched what the Pentagon is calling Operation Epic Fury. Israel's name for it is Operation Shield of Judah. And so I thought it would be important to talk about this first, and then I'll release that next episode sometime in the next few days or so, and hopefully I get CJ back here this week. But like I said, United States is calling it Operation Epic Fury. Israel's calling it Operation Shield of Judah. That's two names for the same war. One is obvious propaganda from the United States designed to sound tough for domestic consumption. We're so tough. And the other one, though, is an admission, right? They named it after themselves, Shield of Judah. They told you who this war is for in the title. And there are massive explosions shaking Tehran right now, all day it's been. The first Israeli strike landed near the offices of Iran's supreme leader, who I now am pretty sure is dead. It looks like it's been confirmed by President Trump and a few other new agencies. And they've been hitting the presidential palace, the National Security Council, nuclear sites or former nuclear sites, military installations. And an Israeli military official told the press this morning that this was planned for months and has much more ambitious aims than last June's Operation Midnight Hammer. And if you take that, and then also if you look at the asset buildup in the Middle East, this is of course true that it's been planned for months. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. With two carrier groups in the Gulf and all this other weaponry and assets. And that's juxtaposed over the fact that we were supposedly negotiating peace. But even though we were negotiating peace, the war was already decided. Tucker Carlson, who I like and respect very much, said even this a few days ago, that Trump hadn't made up his mind yet. I know that he met with Trump, I think it was this past week, a few days ago maybe. So he obviously knows a lot more than I do, but I find that kind of hard to believe. You don't point a loaded weapon if you're not prepared to shoot it. And so after the two carrier buildup, the inertia for war was there. It would have been much harder, in my estimation, to actually pull it back. So I think what's more likely is Trump's handlers have been telling him that we're going to do this for months. And maybe he at one point thought he had some say in the matter. I don't know, but likely did not. Maybe that's why he sounded so unenergetic and deflated in the State of the Union. I actually recorded an episode talking about that, but I didn't get to finish and I didn't get it out. But he sounded so deflated. There was none of the kind of the trademark Trump enthusiasm. I just didn't believe him. That was the thing when listening to it. There's many parts of it that you could talk about or I could talk about, but kind of the overarching sentiment was it sounded like a pep rally for a 1-10 team. He had no energy whatsoever. And then, so today, Trump went on camera and told the Iranian people to take over your government. So any veneer that this was some sort of military operation to stop the capacity of Iran from striking in some way, we'll talk through this a little bit, that's gone. I mean, this isn't a military operation anymore only. This is a regime change, right? Especially now that Khamenei's dead. What's going to happen now with the government? And, of course, Iran's already responded. The Revolutionary Guard has fired missiles at least 4 U.S. military bases across the Gulf. Might be more than that now. This was earlier today when I was looking at it. As far as I know, no U.S. soldiers are dead, which is very fortunate. They're very exposed. A lot of these bases are not really bases. They're these forward positions that are exposed. But explosions have been reported all over the place. Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar. There are people who are dead in UAE. And Hezbollah in Iraq has announced that they're coming for every U.S. base in the region. The Revolutionary Guards are also promising continued retaliation until the enemy is decisively defeated. That's what they said. I don't think that they're going to be able to decisively defeat the United States, but they definitely can do some damage. And it only took hours. Like, it took hours for every single warning that a number of people on the thinking side of this, including me, I like to think, every single warning has come true. The retaliation, the regional escalation, the Gulf states getting dragged in against their will, American bases under fire, all of it. It's happening right now. Iran is threatening the Strait of Hormuz. I released a 10-minute or 11-minute video on this yesterday warning about all of this stuff. You can see it's still pinned on Twitter. I didn't release it on the RSS because it's shorter, but I've been doing shorter episodes on Twitter and releasing it on YouTube. Follow me at Matthew Carano, MATTHEW Carano, on Twitter if you are interested in seeing those, or you can follow, you can subscribe to Brave the New World on YouTube, and you can hear some of that stuff. But and it's not like I'm some seer or anything. This just seemed very clear what would happen, and it is happening. And it's terrible news because Americans are in danger right now, and the threat at escalation is very high. You have service members on those bases that got hit. You've got sailors on those carriers in the Gulf, and you have, of course, Iranian civilians, including what looks like, I mean, I've seen the numbers fluctuate, and you always have to be careful with these things, but it looks like dozens of girls at a primary school in southern Iran struck this morning, children at school. Israel hasn't responded to a request for comment on it. And you think about that in comparison to the people who told you this war was about protecting innocent life, like who used protecting protesters as a reason to step in. But now you've got children killed on day one. How does that compute? It doesn't. But this war is terrible for many reasons, economic reasons, loss of life reasons, but also it's terrible because it confirms how captured the U.S. government is. Like, we know it. We know that AIPAC and the Adelsons, all that, their money is flowing into 90-something% of all federal politicians. Trump has literally said on camera that Miriam Adelson, who has given him roughly $200 million plus, that's what I've seen, hundreds of millions of dollars. He's even said it out loud that she loves Israel more than America. But at least before today, there was some slim hope that it wouldn't escalate. I want to believe that he didn't want this to happen. I mean, he talked about it a decade ago in the, let's see, or right, maybe it's even longer than that, when Obama was president. He's talked about Iran multiple times over the years, probably over the last decade, about stepping in against Iran would be a bad move. It's not Iraq. Iraq was a bad move, and he went after the Bushes over Iraq. He knew what a disaster that was. So I want to think that he didn't want to get this done, but he's just so handled. He's just so corrupted and captured that here we are. But based on what Trump campaigned on, too, on him being on record saying Iraq was a huge mistake, like I said, I hope that he wouldn't do something this foolish, this unpopular, and this clearly not in America's interest, but he did. 80% of Americans didn't want this. Every Gulf nation begged us not to do it. A senior Middle East diplomat with direct knowledge of the peace talks said it plainly this morning. He said, yet again, when negotiations got close to success, Israel has intervened to preempt diplomacy. So what it sounds like to me is the talks were working. And this happened last time, too, in the 12-day war. Talks were ongoing. They were ongoing, but in the middle of them, Israel struck. And it seems like the talks were working again, but Israel killed them with bombs. And then named the operation after themselves and dragged us into it. So what I want to do in this episode, I think is important, is to walk you through some of the things to give some context to what's happening and why, and maybe what we can expect. At Brave the New World, our show is young, but we want to talk about narratives and what the administration, the powers that be, the elite want us to believe versus what is going on. We want to talk about who benefits from these things. So I'm going to try to break some of this down for the next little bit. Okay, so first thing is let's talk about the alleged case for war, because it's so insane to think about. But this is how we got here. Most people know the justification has really shifted multiple times in the last 8 months. It happened with Venezuela as well. You can see these patterns just keep going. And when the reasons keep changing, there is ultimately no reason. Like, they were looking for a reason that stuck long enough that would hopefully get some American support behind them before they started bombing. But this morning, they really stopped looking for it. They never got it because you still had 80% of Americans who opposed this thing. And, so their propaganda as it was, their reasons as they were, did not work. Second thing we'll talk about is the case for. The second thing we'll talk about is the case against. So everything this war is going to cost America, and not in abstract terms, either in real things and in real time. American bases are under fire, as I mentioned. Oil likely to spike, which has ripple effects through our economy. America is probably more sheltered than a lot of other countries in the world, but still, plus another, however long of the region being completely destabilized. It's been destabilized for the last 25 years. And we'll talk about these consequences that I've been warning about, other people have been warning about, me and my small microphone, but I have been saying it, and a lot of people with big microphones have been saying it too, including Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson, etc. Third thing we'll talk about is who is selling this thing and why. And then the fourth thing will happen about it is like, what happens now? What's next? So let's talk about the first thing, the justifications for this war. And these are the goalposts, and they keep changing. So I've talked on the show before too about how this works, how the goalposts kind of, this moving goalpost framework in Venezuela is a great example of that. But it's one of the most reliable indicators that you're being manipulated. When the justification of a policy keeps shifting, when they can't settle on a reason that makes any sense whatsoever, it means that the decision was already made and that the reasons came after. It's like they had the end in mind and they just needed something that would perhaps support it. They failed, but that's what they were looking for. So they're not driving policy with any coherent arguments. They're selling an outcome. That's what they're trying to do. And it's very transparent. Like, no thinking person, if you look at it, believes otherwise. The only people still attempting to justify striking Iran are pursuing an outcome that they know they can't defend honestly, and they don't care. It's either for political gain, it's for monetary gain, it's for influence, whatever. They've got a worldview, whatever, but it's certainly not justifiable to drag America into this. And to that, in the end, justify any means, even if that means harm to America with no possible outside. And I want to tell you, there is no upside to this. And so now the bombs are falling on Tehran, and now American bases are being hit. Let's look at the goalpost shifts in order with their own words, because looking at them now, knowing where we ended up this morning, you can see that the pattern is really undeniable. There was a destination, and the reasons were always disposable. So the first one was nuclear, and this came about in June of 2025. So June 13th, of course, it was in 2025, the United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer, which was a massive aerial bombardment of Iranian nuclear facilities. And there were multiple sites hit. Trump goes on national television and says, and I'm quoting, that we obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons program. That's what he said, obliterated. He didn't say degraded. He didn't say set back. He said obliterated, gone. Message was clear. Threat's gone. Mission accomplished, right? And at that point, honestly, the conversation should be over, right? If you obliterated the nuclear program and your reason for confronting Iran was nuclear, well, then the threat's gone, right? So there's no justification for further military action. But then what happens is goalpost two. You get weeks later after Operation Midnight Hammer, Steve Witkoff, who's Trump's envoy, goes on the record saying, well, Iran is a week away from the bomb. What? A week away. Weeks away after we obliterated their program. So you got two statements from the same administration, weeks apart. The president said obliterated. His envoy said a week away. Both can't be true. It's not possible to obliterate a nuclear program and have that same program just spin up from the ground and be a week from producing a weapon shortly after. So either Trump lied about the success of the operation, which means the case for the first strike was fraudulent, or Witkoff was exaggerating the threat to justify continued aggression. But either way, someone in the administration was lying about Iran. And they want us to trust him with a bigger war. It's stupid. And then, by the way, Trump doubled down on obliterated during the State of the Union address a few days ago. He was still saying it, while his own people were simultaneously saying that the threat was imminent, a week away. And while, as we know, this morning's operation had already been planned. It was already in the planning stages. Now, I believe what Trump said, that their capacity for a nuclear weapon was obliterated, or at least close enough. They weren't close to achieving nuclear weapons before the June strikes, even though Netanyahu has been saying Iran is a week away for 30 years. It's a meme. We make fun of him for this. But it's been untrue the entire time, and it's less true after the strikes, right? Second goalpost. The third one is the protesters in late 2025. So in late 2025, there were massive protests that erupted inside Iran. You had what looked like, what was reported as hundreds of thousands of people in the street protesting the regime. And then immediately, though, the neocons, they pivot because they know the nuclear thing is not satisfying. They can see the polling. Americans aren't buying it. So suddenly, it's not about nuclear anymore. Now it's about supporting the uprising. It's about democracy. It's about the Iranian people rising up against their oppressors and America needing to stand with them. You get Trump, who goes on air and says he vows to intervene militarily to support the protesters. Polls that's not popular. He's talking about military intervention for protests in a sovereign country that never attacked us. Now, as this accelerates, I'll probably say this again, but do I have sympathy and empathy for the Iranian protesters? Absolutely I do. I mean, they're brave people risking their lives. But let's be honest about what happened. The war hawks saw an opportunity and seized it. The protesters weren't the reason. They were the packaging, that the product had never changed. And here's how you know. Ask yourself, did these same people advocate military intervention with protesters when they erupted in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia or in Bahrain, where our own Fifth Fleet is stationed? No. Because those are our allies. We don't bomb our friends when they crush dissent. We sell them the weapons that they use to do it. So the selective outrage is the tell. A principle has to be for everything, every situation. It has to encompass everyone, not just your select group. Doesn't make any sense. So obviously they don't care about Iranian protesters. They care about having a justification that plays on American empathy. And for a few weeks, it worked. It was all over Twitter. People were talking about it. And then again this morning, Trump went on camera and told the Iranian people to take over your government. So still using those protesters as cover for regime change. Except now there's this cruel irony. So while Trump calls on the Iranian people to rise up, Americans and Israeli bombs are killing Iranian civilians. Like, what did you think would happen? You can't just start shooting Tehran, and not expect civilians to die, including dozens of girls at a primary school this morning. You can't be claiming to fight for the Iranian people while bombing their children. But of course, they're going to try. And then it goes, the next goalpost was human rights. So this is January of this year, a month and a half ago or so. But the protests had died down because the regime was cracking down hard. And there were reports of up to a few thousand protesters that were killed. It's a brutal repression. It's not a good regime. And no one who sees that likes it. I mean, it's horrible. And the goalpost moves again. Now it's not about supporting an active uprising because the uprising has been crushed. Now it's about the killings of demonstrators, a humanitarian justification. They're saying we need to act because of the human rights abuses. Now, of course, the crackdown is horrifying. Of course, those killings are wrong. But since when does the United States go to war over human rights abuses? We allied with Saudi Arabia, a country that dismembered a journalist with a bone saw. We sell weapons to Egypt, which has thousands of political prisoners. We maintain relationships with dozens of authoritarian regimes. And here's what should make your blood boil. The same people crying about dead Iranian protesters don't have a single word to say about the tens of thousands of civilians killed in Gaza. At minimum, not one word. They don't care about innocent people being killed. They're using dead protesters as a prop because Americans have empathy. We're feeling people. We don't like to see that shit. And they think that this might be the justification that finally increases their support, but it doesn't. Americans see right through it. You have neocons and spokespeople saying that 30,000 protesters were killed. Just making up numbers, just making them up. Some people saying more than Gaza, just making that up. It's nowhere near that. The numbers that seem the most legit but are probably still inflated, I saw come from the CIA, the US CIA. And somewhere like 6,000 or 65. That's probably inflated, but still thousands. Might be 3,000 protesters. That's terrible. We hate to see that, but justification for blowing up Tehran and killing more civilians? No. Any shred of humanitarian justification disappears when you bomb Tehran. And that's not even considering what happens after. What happened to Iraq after the U.S. invasion? It became a failed state. It's not just direct military action that kills people. It's disease, starvation, infrastructure collapse. Draping war in a flag of humanitarianism is propaganda at its most cynical. We are setting right now the conditions for mass death for innocent Iranian people. And it's our fault. Our government's choosing to do this for no coherent reason. So humanitarian reasons, it's not the justification for what we're doing right now. Doesn't make any sense. Then the goalpost changed again back this past month in February. We came full circle. Nuclear again. The demand was back to nuclear. Iran must be stopped from enriching uranium. The original justification returned, like the last ones had never happened. But wait, we already obliterated their enrichment capacity. The president said so. He just said it again, as I mentioned on the State of the Union. So demanding they stop enrichment makes no sense if you've already destroyed their ability to do it. Really, what they're saying is it's something like they must stop thinking about possibly enriching uranium in the future. That's what it is. Like, just don't have the thought. They're like reading minds. Oh, we think that they're potentially going to try to do it in the future, so we got to strike them now. It's not a coherent argument. It's not a coherent argument. You're obviously not looking for compliance from them. You're looking for a reason to strike them. And now we know they weren't even looking for a reason anymore. They're not even trying to justify it. I said this as a senior diplomat from the Mideast went on the record today saying that the talks were getting close to being successful. They said diplomacy was working. I mean, it looked like it. We were, as long as we're talking, we're not fighting. But I didn't mean to be cynical about it, but I knew exactly what happened during the first round of talks before the 12-day war. U.S. and Israel broke it off. They were still negotiating and just started bombing them. And I thought, well, this is going to be cover. I'm going to start bombing them again. And they did. But Iran was at the table, and Israel preempted it, killed the talks, started the bombing while negotiations were still ongoing. So they didn't really want or need justification. They were trying to sell it. They were trying to get some support from the American people. When that didn't come, it just didn't matter anymore. The justifications really were theater. They were going to do it anyway. So we had 5 goalposts that changed, these like costume changes for the same war. And this morning they stopped it. They just started bombing. So the real reasons are on full display. Like, listen to Trump this morning. The White House put out a video of him talking. Trump called it regime change on camera. Netanyahu said the goal is to remove the existential threat. Israel's defense minister called it a preemptive attack to remove threats to the state of Israel. Not threats to America, of course, threats to Israel. That's what this is all about, not America. There's no upside for America. This is the moving goalpost framework in its purest form, its most transparent form. Everyone can see it. When the reason keeps changing, the reason doesn't matter. The decision was made before the first justification was ever offered, months ago. Would the American people buy it? They wondered, but we never did. Everything was marketing, though. They never found any support, but they tried it anyway. If the veil didn't lift for you during COVID, or watching this Epstein cover-up, where the administration tried to block all the files from coming out after running on it, if it wasn't clear for you then, it should be crystal clear for you now who is in control of our government. Because they have no case for war. Those pushing for it were always incoherent. They couldn't hold a consistent position for more than 6 weeks because they didn't have one. We've established 2 things. One, that the case for the war was always incoherent, and there's no justification that's surviving any basic scrutiny. And in the end, they didn't even bother landing on one before the bomb started falling. And really, the case against is so overwhelming. There's just no upside for America. Iran can't hit U.S. soil with anything. They don't have nuclear capacity anyway. It's gone. It's obliterated. They don't have any missiles or any way to strike American soil, but besides like a terrorist attack. We're always going to be vulnerable for that. They haven't hit us in America on American soil. So what's the upside for America? I don't see one. There's only downside. Its downside is tremendous amount of debt. And what are we going to do? Print more to fund this thing? Downside of, I've seen reports that America is very low in our munitions. And so what happens while we're spending it all on a war of choice in Iran and something happens here that we need to defend ourselves against? We're not going to have the capacity to do that. It's just stupid. So why did this happen? If there was no case for it, if 80% of Americans oppose the war, if every Gulf ally begged us not to do it, if the military reality is a nightmare, if the economic consequences are catastrophic, if every historical precedent tells us that this ends in disaster, if the peace talks were actually working, why are American bases under fire this morning? Because the people who drove this decision were never representing you. They were never representing America. They were representing a very specific set of interests, and they built a pipeline to convert those interests into American foreign policy without needing American support. Here's how it works. You have special interest funded think tanks like the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FTD. And according to multiple media reports, FTD has been, quote, instrumental in writing Trump's Iran policy. They are, quote, driving the push for war. So you have a think tank, and it's not just them, there are others, wrote the policy that produced this morning. Not the State Department, not the Pentagon, not career diplomats or military strategists with decades of experience, a think tank with donors, with an agenda, with a very specific ideological worldview that prioritizes Israeli security interests. And this is the same neoconservative infrastructure that brought us the Iraq War. It's the same network that told you that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, that told you we'd be greeted as liberators, that told you it would be quick and clean and democracy would bloom in the desert. They were wrong, of course, about everything. They were exposed as either liars or incompetents, and instead of being banished from serious policy conversations, they rebranded, new names, new organizations, same agenda, same playbook, same catastrophic judgments. So you got orgs like the FTD who write policy papers. They provide the intellectual architecture. They create the framework that politicians can cite and media personalities can repeat. They're the factory. And everything else is distribution. So then, once the policy exists, it needs to be sold. That's where the media personalities come in. You've got Ben Shapiro, who spent months demanding, not suggesting, not cautiously supporting, demanding that Trump bomb Iran. Again, harder, more. This is, of course, never Trumper Ben Shapiro, who is now firmly entrenched in the MAGA cult. And when people raised the very reasonable concerns that thousands of Americans could die and that we'd lose the war that follows, Shapiro mocked them. He mocked them. And this morning, American bases have been hit by Iranian missiles. The Revolutionary Guard are promising continued strikes until the enemy is decisively defeated. You've got Hezbollah mobilizing against U.S. positions in Iraq. You've got American service members under fire right now. That's still mockable, Ben? Shapiro is a self-described proud Zionist. He's been open about the fact that he views American foreign policy through the lens of what's good for Israel. It's his words, his framework. He built a career opposing identity politics while openly practicing the most consequential form of it, advocating that American kids die in wars that serve a foreign nation's strategic interest. Then there's Mark Levin, maybe my favorite, because he's just such a belligerent boomer. Levin didn't just advocate for war from behind his microphone. He went to the White House to do it directly. He was physically there. And what was his argument? I mean, his arguments suck. He wrote, Netanyahu is the elected prime minister of sovereign nations, and we should follow him. He knows what's best in that region. And Israel is such an important, partner. We should do what he says. So he wants American kids to go to war for Israel. Well, Netanyahu got his war. American kids are under fire, and Levin is behind a microphone where he always has been, where he'll be until he sheds his mortal coil. The think tanks write the policy. The media personalities create the public permission structure or try to. In this case, they failed. The public said no. As I mentioned, 80% opposed. But the pipeline doesn't need public support. It just needs the appearance of a debate. Shapiro, Levin, those like him did that. Dave Rubin, another one, although he's the dumbest of them. They made it seem like there were two sides when there was really just one side and 80% of Americans. That was it. So you got the policy written, you got the media campaign running. Now it needs political authorization. Not explicitly, but nonetheless, backing. And that's where the senators come in, of course. And nobody in the United States Senate has pushed harder for bombing Iran than Lindsey Graham. Nobody. Graham has been calling for strikes on Iran for years. Not cautiously, not conditionally, openly, gleefully. It's like a hyena advocating for military confrontation as if it were a football game. Iraq, he was for it. Libya, for it. Syria, for it. Iran, he's been begging for it. Wonder what they all have in common. And who funds Lindsey Graham? Well, that's the question you should always ask when a politician's position on war doesn't align with what 80% of his constituents want. No, he's funded by defense contractors. He's funded by AIPAC and its affiliate PACs. It's the same donor network that funds FTD. The same ecosystem, the same money, the same agenda. Different nodes, but all in the same network. Graham sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He has direct influence over military authorization. He has direct access to classified briefings, direct input into the policy process, and he uses every lever available to him to push for exactly what happened this morning. And here's what tells you everything about Graham's priorities. When it comes to spending money on American infrastructure, healthcare, veterans care, anything that directly benefits the people of South Carolina who elected him, suddenly he's fiscally responsible or fiscal responsibility matters to him. Suddenly we need to watch the budget. Suddenly we can't just spend money we don't have. But a war with Iran, a multi-trillion-dollar military operation against a country of 90 million people, blank check. He's for it. No questions asked. The money is always there when the bombs are for someone else's benefit. Tom Cotton, same breed. Cotton wrote the infamous letter to Iran during the Obama administration designed to sabotage the nuclear deal before it was ever finalized. A sitting senator actively undermining American diplomacy because the deal didn't serve the interests he represents. And those interests aren't in Arkansas. Cotton has been one of the loudest voices calling for maximum pressure on Iran. No deal, no diplomacy, no negotiations, only force. Check the donor rolls. Defense industry, pro-Israel PACs, the same pipeline, the same money. And this morning, Cotton and Graham got what they've been pushing for. Their constituents, working families in South Carolina and Arkansas, are about to eat the economic consequences. They're going to have higher gas, higher groceries, higher everything, while their senators cash checks from the people who profit from the bombs. And then there's the foreign government, Netanyahu himself, the foreign leader at the end of the pipeline, the one who lobbied harder than anyone for the bombs that fell this morning. Before the Oman peace talks even started, Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with Netanyahu first. So we get the American negotiator checking in with Israel before negotiating with Iran, which tells you who's running this process. Netanyahu was at the White House, what was it, a dozen times in the last year, 7 times maybe in the last year, proposing follow-on strikes, expanded operations. He told Trump that any deal with Iran must include elements vital to Israel. Must. Not we'd prefer, not we'd appreciate, must. You got a foreign head of state telling the American president, funding them, that American foreign policy must serve his country's interests. And this morning, it does. At the cost of American lives, probably, and American treasure. And the talks were working. Diplomacy was producing results, and Netanyahu killed it. He preempted the peace process with a military operation that his own officials say was planned for months. And remember, Netanyahu said the goal is to remove the existential threat. Israel's defense minister called it a preemptive attack to remove threats to the state of Israel. They're not hiding it. They're saying openly on the record that this is about Israeli security, achieved with American weapons, flown by American pilots, protected by American sailors, paid for by American taxpayers who are $39 trillion in debt. And also, they don't care what comes next for Iran. Chaos is fine for them. because it means that their regional rival is declawed. If there's chaos in Iran, their regional rival, then Iran can't oppose them in any way. They're happy about that. They don't care if there's a humanitarian crisis. They don't care that just like after other failed advances in the Middle East, that you had failed states and refugees pouring into Europe. They don't care about that stuff. They just care that they can't be opposed in their region. And meanwhile, the countries that actually border Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, UAE, Kuwait, every single one of them said, don't do it. They refused, in fact, to let us use their bases. They lobbied for diplomacy because they live there. They knew what would happen. I mean, Dubai is getting hit today. Bahrain's getting hit today. They're getting hit today. Oman got hit today. Iranian missiles are landing on their soil because we started a war that they asked us not to start. So let's just be very clear about the chain of influence that produced this morning. So you got captured think tanks that write the policy. You got Shapiro, Levin, corporate media, and other shills, Rubin, try to sell it to the public. Public says no. 80% opposed. Graham and Cotton provide the political infrastructure and cover. Netanyahu lobbies the president directly. You've got the AIPAC and the other Israel First PACs and the Adelsons giving Trump hundreds of millions of dollars. Preempts working peace negotiation, and everybody plans this operation for months while pretending to support diplomacy. That's the pipeline. And here's the thing that needs to be said clearly on a day like this. None of them will serve. None of them will send their children. None of them will be on those bases that got hit this morning. FTD will publish a lessons learned paper and raise more money for the next policy. Shapiro and Levin will be behind microphones where they have always been and where they always will be. Graham and Cotton will issue statements calling your kid a hero, put a flag pin on, look somber on camera, and then go back to the same offices where they built the architecture for this war to start building the architecture for the next one. Netanyahu will give a speech about the unbreakable bond between America and Israel from a podium in Jerusalem, not from a base in Kuwait, pulling missile fragments out of concrete, not from a school in southern Iran, pulling children out of rubble, from Jerusalem, where he's safe, where he's always been safe. None of them will bear any cost. They never do. The costs are yours, mine. So let's talk about the buildup. For weeks, the United States assembled the largest military force in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. You had 2 carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf, F-22 Raptors deployed to Israel soil for the first time in history. You have B-2 stealth bombers in position, strike windows, leaked to the press. Reuters reporting plans for weeks-long operations. Anyone paying attention knew what that meant, that there's a principle in military strategy, as old as war itself. You don't deploy forces you don't intend to use. The act of deployment carries its own gravity. It creates expectations within the military, within the administration, within allied governments, within the enemy's calculus. Once the gun is pointed, standing down becomes harder than pulling the trigger. The buildup was the decision. It wasn't posturing. It wasn't coercive diplomacy. It wasn't a show of force. It was the decision. And there's a detail that makes it worse, because once you know that the operation was planned for months with much more ambitious aims than June, then everything else was a sales job and a facade. The F-22s didn't go to Avda Air Base as a precaution. They went as a pre-positioned asset for an operation that was already planned. It was already a go. The carriers didn't move into the Gulf as a show of force. They moved because the strike packages were already written. The B-2s were positioned weren't positioned as a deterrent. They were a weapon waiting for a launch order that was already coming. Yet every piece of the buildup was a piece of the plan. It wasn't a signal. It was the plan for a war decided months ago. While peace talks were ongoing, while American diplomats sat across from Iranian diplomats in good faith, while the public was told diplomacy was the priority. But none of it was real. The peace talks were the theater. The buildup was already the decision. The Geneva talks through Oman were the last diplomatic window. There was reason to suspect that they might be designed to fail. All the buildup, number one, as I just mentioned. And it was only there to provide cover so that Americans could say, so the American diplomats or the Trump administration could say, we tried diplomacy, it didn't work, we have no choice. But it was clear that's not what was happening. I mean, it seems like they were succeeding, and Iran had no capacity to have a nuclear weapon, so we had time, but Israel killed it. So progress was being made. A deal was within reach, and Israel, which had been planning this operation for months, decided that a successful negotiation was a threat, because a peace deal would eliminate the justification for the war that they've already decided that they wanted to fight and rope us into. So they preempted it. They launched strikes, dragged us in while the negotiations were still ongoing and negotiators were still at the table. So this isn't a failure of diplomacy. This is the assassination of diplomacy by a country that needed diplomacy to fail in order to get the war that it wanted, paid for by another country, us, fought for by another country's children, ours. And now the administration has its cover story, as transparent as it is, though we can all see through it. But now they can say, we tried, it didn't work, we had no choice, but it's a lie, we can all see through it. Diplomacy didn't fail, obviously. So now the gun's been fired, what follows? So this morning, of course, is not, still it's ongoing, and it's not the end, it's close to the beginning. If we believe a lot of the reports that have come out that the plan was for weeks of bombardment, we'll see. I hope it stops. But likely not. So what's going to happen? Iran's Revolutionary Guards have promised continued retaliation until the enemy is decisively defeated. Their words. I don't think that they can do that, but a sustained military commitment can be done. They're demonstrating their capability as we speak. Iran is not Iraq. Their proxy network is activating. You got Hezbollah has announced operations against every U.S. base in Iraq. Thousands of American troops who were there for counter-ISIS operations are now targets in a war that they weren't deployed for. Nobody asked them. Nobody asked their families. Many of these bases, I said this earlier, but they're little more than outposts with tents. Like, they're not really equipped to defend themselves. They're not major air bases or anything, not a lot of them. And Hezbollah in Lebanon was struck yesterday by Israel, and I'm sure it was to try to remove some of this threat. But Hezbollah in Lebanon has the largest non-state missile arsenal in the world. There's something like 150,000 rockets and missiles at their disposal, and if they activate them, that's northern Israel becomes a war zone, right? And then what happens? So Israel's got to escalate there too, and now it's multi-front. Then what? We escalate, Iran escalates. This is a spiral that could happen, that analysts warned about. You also have, tangentially, you get the Houthis in Yemen, who've already demonstrated their ability to strike shipping in the Red Sea and hit targets deep inside Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So they're part of the Iranian network. They could act. You've got the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran has spent decades building the capability to shut it down with anti-ship missiles, fast attack boats, naval mines. Their entire naval doctrine exists because of this. And they may not close it today, but every day the war continues, the probability increases. It's a credible threat. And, they said even today that they're shutting it down. I don't know if they can fully, but they may try. And we'll see what happens. It's not a veiled threat. But then oil likely spikes. And since nothing about this morning suggests de-escalation and the strait gets threatened, you're looking at, oil spikes, gas prices that are harder on working families. It's maybe a little bit easier to tolerate, like I said earlier, here in the United States, but across the world. You've got more inflation. We have to pay for this somehow. So you're going to have the money printers go print, maybe a recession. That's all in play. And then there's the military reality that no one is really talking about. You can't bomb a country into submission from the air. Like, it doesn't work. Not against a country of this size, 90 million people, with this level of military capability. Air campaigns degrade, they destroy, they kill, but they don't produce surrender. They don't produce regime change. They produce rage. They produce resilience. They produce the exact opposite of what the planners say that they intended. So if the goal is actually regime change, and the Iranian people aren't going to do it themselves, which I find it more likely that they'll fractionalize than they will regime change. Then if the goal is regime change, then airstrikes are phase one. Like, we can't do it that way. So then what? A ground invasion of a 90 million person country with what army? Like, we can barely recruit enough soldiers to maintain our current force levels. And then how long would we occupy for? With what money? We're $39 trillion in debt. No one pushing Trump into war has offered a coherent answer to what comes next. And as I mentioned before, the humanitarian fallout. How's that going to end up? So likely the air campaign fails to produce a regime change. The regime survives in some way, even with money dead. And you've then got a population that just watched U.S. bomb their schools. And then we're left with a country that's more hostile, more dangerous, more motivated to develop actual nuclear weapons, and more capable of striking us than before this morning. That's the trajectory. That's where this goes. It's not me being pessimistic. It's because that's where it's gone every single time. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, the outcomes are always worse than the status quo. No exceptions. And the architecture of those disasters, or the architects of those disasters, are the same people who architected this one. So here we are, February 28th, 2026. The United States is at war with Iran. America calls it Operation Epic Fury. Israel calls it Operation Shield of Judah. Two names, one war, one's marketing from Trump, rah-rah marketing, and the other one is an admission to what we're really doing there. We had ongoing peace talks up until yesterday, appeared to be working, doesn't matter, started bombing. The neocons never left Washington. They put on MAGA hats. The people who sold you Iraq, who were wrong about everything, who were exposed as liars, incompetent. They were never held accountable. They just rebranded. New names, same agenda, same playbook. And this morning they delivered their second catastrophe. Different president, different target, same con, same pipeline. You've got think tanks like the FDD who wrote the policy. You've got Shapiro and Levin and others who sold it. You got Graham and Cotton and others building the political architecture. You got Netanyahu lobbying the president, preempting peace, planning the war for months while pretending to support diplomacy. You got the American people, the ones who actually fight and die and pay, well ignored completely. 80% said no. They did it anyway. But that's the pipeline. Think tank, media, Congress, foreign government, war. And the American people are not in that chain. We're not a variable. We're the fuel. So we've got a war. Not for us. Not for the Gulf nations that asked us not to do it. Not for the military families, probably terrified right now. Not for the taxpayers. Not for the Iranian citizens, the children being pulled from rubble. Not for the next generation who will inherit the debt, the enemies, and the blowback. It's not for America. The war's for Israel, fought by Americans, funded by Americans, opposed by Americans, suffered by Americans. I say that not with hatred, not with bigotry, not with animosity towards Jewish people or Israeli civilians in bomb shelters right now because their prime minister made this a choice for them too. He did. I say it because it's the truth. This war isn't for us, and it never was.
You wear the flag on your dress like a cataract. The dual colors see the truth and then filter it. And now your mind's eye is bruised like a pugilist. You evangelize and